My name is Clemens Ganter. I'm the moderator for this session, and it's my pleasure to first introduce to you V.Polidori. He's working at the Pontifical University in the Lateran, actually in a branch of this university situated in L'Aquila. He received his PhD in 2012 in Oriental Ecclesiastical Sciences at the Pontificio Istituto Orientale in Rome. The topic of his thesis was Byzantine liturgy in the 12th century Salento. And he has published widely in the past years, and I cannot even cite all the monographs and edited volumes. Maybe only this year appeared an edited volume where Dr. Polidori was editor, entitled Non solum circulatorum nudo simila, containing studies on early Christianity in the first millennium. This has come out only this year. Today he will speak about dating the Diataxis of Paul, Bishop of Gallipoli, on liturgical grounds. Please.
Thank you for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank our host for the kind invitation and all of you for your presence. It's a pleasure to be here and share our research. And I'm glad also to meet again many friends, many colleagues that I've known for many years when we were studying in Rome with our common didaskalos, Stefan Paretti. So, my topic of today is about the famous, actually I don't know how much famous is this letter. Maybe it could be used for a short recap. So basically it's an answer of a letter allegedly sent by a recently elected bishop of Gallipoli to the Patriarch of Constantinople, asking for some liturgical instructions about prophecies and about the pre-sanctified liturgy. And we don't have neither the original letter nor the answer, but we have the text of the answer incorporated in later Ecologia, in a form of a Diataxis. So my topic of today is about this letter sent by Patriarch of Constantinople to a Paul, Bishop of Gallipoli, considered to be a precious witness of the liturgical practice of the great church in the 12th century. So the letter was first edited by Cozzaluzzi in 1905, and then again, the second one is not technically an edition, it's still unpublished, but you can get it on the internet. So again in 1983, but it's just in the recension of the Liturgical of Casole. And finally, it is its first critical edition in 2012. The text is transmitted by 9 manuscripts, the dates of which range from the 12th to the 14th centuries, one of which has been discovered just a few years ago, I think 4 years ago. This new witness in particular gave me the opportunity to update the critical edition, and now I can confirm what I was just suggesting in 2012 on philological basis and against the general consensus, namely that not only the Typicon of Casole is not the common antigraph of the rest of the manuscript edition, but also that there were two different textual families, being the new Codex Z, strictly related to the one V I already put in a different branch of the stemma in 2012. This is the new one, this is the old one. In 2012, this was the stemma, and it was pretty strange, but now it was confirmed by the existence of this one. So, the data and authorship of the letter have been discussed for several years, without any general consensus being reached. First dated around 1080 by Cozzaluzzi, the letter has been redated by André Jacob, who proposed the date about 1173. In more recent times, a date between 1075 and 1084 has been proposed on theological basis, but it was criticized by Sauroledon. Sauroledon is the editor of the Codex Z in 2015. Surprisingly enough, up to now, the liturgical content of the letter hasn't been taken into account for its date. So let's start by saying that a date about 1173, as proposed by Jacob, is problematic not only on the basis of its highly hypothetical nature. In fact, it is mainly based on a conjectural reading of a lost archive source, but also because of the very high degradation of the text itself in some early witnesses, as well as its early splitting into two different recension, and we saw in the stemma. I take a step back. Here, this is the Ottoboni dated in the eulogy of the Cathedral of Otranto. We saw in the presentation. And here, the text of the patriarchal letter is already messed up. Also here, and this is a problem because here we are in 1177, and Jacob proposed the date for the letter of 1173. So in just 4 years, the thing messed up. So it's incredible. So, okay, now, if we turn to the content of the letter, which has been neglected until now, perhaps because of the lack of a through study of the history of the prophecies' rites, we immediately come across two oddities. The first one is this. You can open your handout on the first page. You see the part of the critical edition updated. First, we read that they pour wine metade tinefkin emerginomenon. So I reckon that this passage was understood until now as a kind of elliptical form of a future participle, so that we could translate they pour the wine that will become blood after the prayer. But, in fact, I think it's not like this. It's not pointing to the epiclesis of the anaphora, it's pointing to the prophecy itself. So, apart from this not so usual grammatical form, so I think basically this is just a simple present participle. I have good reason to think that at least from Germanos on, but also a bit earlier, the prophecies is nothing more than the representation of the death and burial of Christ. So, that what we have in the prophecies is the body and the blood of the dead Christ. So, the text is saying that the bread and the wine that you have in the prophecies rice is already the wine, the blood and the body of Christ, but the dead Christ. Consequently, the priest may need a prayer to transform ordinary bread and wine into the body and the blood of the dead Christ. And it's not science fiction, because if we open the liturgy of Chrysostom in our earliest witness, at the very first page, we found this prayer, where there is an epiclesis. Yeah. This is the prophecies. The only thing of the prophecies that we can find in the Chrysostom liturgy in the Barberini. This is the Protestant prayer of the Alexandrine recension of the Liturgy of Basil, but we find it also in the Liturgy of Peter, and we still find it in the Prothesis of the Liturgy of Mark, in another slightly different recension. It is in fact an Egyptian Melchite element that probably came into Agiopolite books of the Sinai, and then from there to southern Italy in the Chrysostom liturgy. And Gabriel dealt with a lot of stuff with the same root, basically. Yeah? So in this prayer, the priest is asking Jesus Christ himself to change the Eucharistic gifts into his dead body and blood. For obvious reasons, the prayer is theologically embarrassing. So it was gradually undermined, I would say, and eventually replaced, at least in Chrysostom, by Theosimon between the 12th and the 13th centuries. For our purposes, the relevant fact, however, is that this prayer never figured in the Ecologion of the Great Church. Consequently, it's rather unlikely that someone, a guy whose job was to rule that church, could prescribe its use to anyone. And then the second oddity is this phrase. They put in the hand, metatihiri, the crown that they have removed. Here we would have expected metatinhira with the accusative. So actually, the form with the dative is attested either in texts that are not mainstream ones, such as magical, oracular, Orphic, or in marginal poetic ones like those of the Empress Eudocia. So since it's rather unlikely that a formal letter written by a patriarch in Constantinople could use such an unusual expression, we must assume that this dative form in the Diataxis is hyperurbanism, meaning in the hand. Dia chiron echo means I have in my hands, so I deal with in a technical business sense. Now, as far as we know, hyperurbanisms are a typical trait of forgery. Besides, we can notice that this particular detail was not received at all by the Ecologia Typica of the Salento, which we put on the discos instead, probably because the expression sounded somewhat unfamiliar even to them. So these two clues suggest that we could be dealing with a forgery. But why should the Church of Gallipoli or somewhere in Salento have forged this letter? In order to answer the question, it could be useful to take a closer look at the Prothesis rite itself and reconstruct it as it was at the end of the 12th century in the Salento. This is not too difficult since we are lucky enough to have several witnesses. So let's take a look at this schema in the handout on page 2. So already, as you see in the handout, already in the third quarter of the 12th century, there is a very well-developed rite, divided very clearly in 7 parts: actions on the bread, actions on the wine, incense, Prothesis prayer, covering, other incensing, dismissal. So we have more than one prospera. We have one prayer of the Prothesis. We have incense and we have commemorations. But does it match the rite described in the letter? No, it doesn't. There we have instead 2 prayers, just one prospera, and neither incense nor commemorations are mentioned. In other words, it seems that the Salento took the formal elements of the letter Diataxis, but not the substantial ones. In fact, none of the statements the ones that you're reading in the slide, is completely true for the rite of the Salento. And the rite of the pseudo-letter doesn't match the one of the Great Church either, where we find a rite not too different from the Salentine one. But since the Barberini 336, the Calabrian, what was the situation there in Calabria? You can find a more detailed analysis of this on the 4th page of your handout. So the development of the Protestant rite in Calabria may be summarized in this outline. We notice that in the 11th century we have a rite, the major traits of which match the Diataxis of Gallipoli much more than we might expect. In fact, particularly in the 11th century, we have both of the prayers mentioned in the Diataxis, no commemorations and just one prosperity. In the Calabrian early Ecologia, very often the incense prayer is either at the very beginning or at the end of the rite, so that it is not strange that it could be seen as something not really belonging to the process itself, but more properly as a distinct element. And that could explain why we don't find any mention of incense in an instruction about the preparation of the Eucharistic gifts. So the letter could be a Calabrian forgery. But since there are many differences between southern and northern Calabria, where exactly could the forgery have been made? We have 3 clues here that pointed my attention to Rossano. First, here we have a very archaic and conservative rite as attested by the manuscript Grottaferrata Gamma Vita 8. Second, its scribes were very skilled. They were able to make a believable forgery. Yeah, that's the thing. Third, on the other side of the Gulf, there is Gallipoli. So, in the logic of a forgery, it's pretty reasonable that a letter delivered to Gallipoli could reach the other side of the Gulf, meaning that the southeastern Calabria. That was the aim of the forgery. This is just an example. This is the Gamma Vita 8, just to show you how nice it is. Okay, but why? You still need to explain the reason for forging such a letter. So, while it's pretty evident that the aim of the letter was to promote a particular rite, we don't actually know whether the target of the forgery was the Salento or another Calabrian milieu. But I think the second option is more likely. In fact, in 12th century southern Calabria, much more than in the Salento, we have evidence of competing rites, as we can see in this Diataxis. Here there are several elements to be noticed. First, they stress they don't say os probaton, that was said in Rossano's text, because it's a prophecy and not a prayer. Besides, it's not worthy that, as an example of prayer, they choose exactly a consecratory epiclesis like the one we have in Rossano. Secondly, they add commemorations that we don't have in the archaic rite of Rossano. Third, they state that their tradition, parenthesis, is the best, meaning, of course, that there were other traditions circulating in the same liturgical milieu. So this Diataxis must have been made in a cathedral church of southern Calabria, because they talk about archielefs. So, and the manuscript is in Regio style, so we can restrict the possibilities. Could be Santa Severina, could be Bova, or another cathedral church that at the end of the 11th or 12th century wasn't Latinized. So, everywhere in southern Calabria except Rossano, for obvious reasons. So, the framework of the forgery could be a sort of war of rights between the two very close Calabrian seas. In Italian, we have a word that describes this situation, but I can't translate it. Campanilismo. You know? Yeah. So, who has the highest bell tower? So, paradoxically, if this scenario is true, the forgery resulted in a total failure. Since while Salento partially fell for it and incorporated at least minor elements from the Diataxis, perhaps because of its early incorporation in the Typicon of Casole, Calabria wasn't influenced at all by the alleged patriarchal letter. And so Rossano had lost its liturgical battle. So my conclusions are: the so-called Diataxis of Paul of Gallipoli, believed until today to be a patriarchal letter of the end of the 12th century, is in fact a forgery made in the southern Calabria of no later than the very beginning of the 12th century. The forger is probably to be situated in the scriptorium of Rossano, which was still celebrating an archaic rite of the prothesis between the 11th and the 12th centuries. And the aim of the forgery was presumably to promote and or defend this particular praxis, while its own liturgical milieu, southern Calabria, was shifting towards a more developed rite. More generically speaking, we could add another conclusion. Thinking of many colleagues who spend their whole lives studying the theology of Chrysostom liturgy or that of Basil or whatever, we can see how this expression is completely senseless because each milieu had its own liturgical text and habits and consequently its own theology. As a consequence, liturgical theology must also be put into an historical and geographical perspective. As demonstrated by Stefano Parenti, the history of worship is a regional history. And that's all.
Thank you very much. I've been informed that we're going to have the discussion right away,
Yes.
So please, first question, yes.
Just to add some support, I guess, to the phenomenon of a southern Calabrian appealing to Constantinople within a forgery within a liturgical context, precisely in the 12th century in southern Calabria / Sicily, we have the tendency to standardize nuptial rites and specifically ascribe the local nuptial rite, as opposed to the parallel rites, which were more Constantinopolitan, to Constantinople's, precisely to Methodius of local birth, but as a sort of a Constantinopolitan authoritative appeal to conserve the local marriage rite. So this is going on in Calabria, this appeal to Constantinople to defend local praxis.
Oh, good.
I have a question. To what extent do you think now we can use this letter? I realize that the ground becomes a lot more shaky. But to what extent can we use it as, in some way, giving us at least hints by which the local church perceived what was the practice in Constantinople? In other words, can we use it in any way anymore as a source for Constantinopolitan, right? Because if a forger is insisting that this is how it's done in Constantinople, in other words, we have the authentic tradition not because it's ours and local, but because it's done there, and that's where the authority comes from. There must be at least, either it's a flat-out lie, or there's at least some recollection or conviction or belief, at least, right? Conviction that that is what was being done in Constantinople or is being done in Constantinople.
So, in my view, it was a typical Italian thing. So basically, it's a lie. maybe that someone could think that yes, this monk came 100 years ago. It was in Palestine, but he was also in Costa. Yes, could be, but I think they, in fact, knew that has nothing to do with some people. But we actually don't even know whether they knew what was the rite in Constantinople at all. So, however, to be synthetic, I think it was just a lie.
So this is a question from complete ignorance to ask about the larger context of what you're describing. What's the origin of the competing rites, and what's the significance if you have competing rites within a geographic area that is part of the same linguistic tradition and originally shared the same liturgical tradition as well?
So the thing is that until, I think, 10 or 15 years ago, we used to think at the Byzantine Rite in southern Italy in very simplified terms. This is the Salento, which is more proximate to Constantinople, and this is southern, the so-called Asse Emiliano. How do you translate it? The axis of the San Nils of Rossano, so the other side of the sea, okay, from Calabria to southern Lazio. But now I think that we have to narrow much more our field, because we see that in 50 kilometers we have two completely different rites, especially for the soft parts of the liturgy. For instance, the prophecies. We know that is a more modern addition to the liturgy itself. So, if we take the okay. So from here to there, or from here to there, would be 80 kilometers. But there, if you take a look at the handouts, you see two completely different rites. So we have to imagine that also in the Salento itself there were some slight differences between Casole and Gallipoli and Otranto. So it's a very complicated thing. You have to focus on the very small milieu, not the Calabria, the Sicily, the Salento. It's pretty much complicated than it's more complicated.
I wonder why this happens.
Why?
In such a small territory, you have such different rites. I mean, what about the history? How did it develop to become like that?
But I can just formulate an hypothesis of that. I think that since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, that they had streets, it was very difficult to communicate in this region because there are a lot of mountains there, especially here. It's all mountains, and then this less. But so the communications were somewhat difficult, and it was very, very unsafe also. Because of frequent raids of the Arabs, and but the territory itself was very dangerous. So I think it was a logistic problem, basically.
But you have the sea. I mean, if you talk about...
Yes, I don't think the sea was safer.
From one, valley to the other.
It was full of Arabs, actually. So, not safe at all. Not safe at all.
Yeah, just to say that especially in this area, Arab raids were actually a really big problem.
Yes,
coming from, yeah, so,
yes.
so this it
Yeah,
was
they have
certainly dangerous.
daily
for a long
raids
time.
from the Arabs. So.
Yeah.
And that's why you see the settlements always not on the seashore but on the top of the hill.
Makes sense.
So I'm very happy there is a lot of interest.
Well, this is a
Thing.
very interesting topic. I mean, I wouldn't have, as a Slavicist, I wouldn't have believed that there's such a variety of different rites in such a small area.
Yes.
This is a remarkable fact.